Dave Jones, I love when we're on the same page. We're wearing matching St. Joe's
Look at
gear.
this. Look at this.
Yeah, I
Yeah.
know it's I mean, that's my basketball squad. Dave knows it. Dave's a huge
What are the
college
chances? What are the
hoops
chances?
fan. Your shirt's way nicer than mine as we begin the Blue White Breakdown podcast. But man, I'm just glad you could throw a little support behind the Hawks because it's been a rough go lately. Much like Northwestern, it's been a little bit of a rough go for the Hawks.
Yeah. I like Billy, but that's a tough job, man. He walked into a tough situation. He's a good dude. I've always liked him, but man, I don't know.
Dave, how about Pat Fitzgerald? I mean, where are you on him? I mean,
I'm late taping because I want to watch the end of the replay.
Yeah.
it's not good, man. I mean, they have been able to survive. I think just in general, Bob, it's getting harder and harder to survive with 2 and 3 star athletes around college football, and he's done it with some sort of magic potion for a while now. But you see Wisconsin starting to fall by the wayside. You see Nebraska just not being able to cut it with those guys. And Northwestern, I mean, they have lost to 3 consecutive underdogs. And they're not good football teams. You're talking about Duke. You're talking about
Southern Illinois.
The Salukis. That's a Walt Frazier school, not
the Glide,
not a Dick Butkus school. And then this last game against Miami of Ohio, just I mean, I'm watching it. It's just basic breakdowns. The game is 7-0 going into the half. They've already botched a potential TD drive with a fumble. But it's still, they still got the lead, and then they don't recognize a very apparent punt block that Miami has on, and the 2 guards in the middle of the formation just release and run upfield, and they get gang rushed by like 6 guys that the protectors can't handle. I mean, that is basic stuff. That it's not really about athletes. It's just about dysfunction. And there were fumbles. There were other stuff that happened. Ryan Helinski looked really good at the start of the game. For those who don't know, he was a 4-star, borderline 5-star quarterback that they got who transferred in a couple years ago. Did not perform well initially, but had looked good against Nebraska. If you saw the Ireland game. He looked good in this game. He hit 13 of his first 16 passes. They have, it's not like they don't have skill players. They do. Evan Hall is a really good little bumper car type of feature back who's low to the ground and keeps his balance and is a problem. Eric Clare, they got like 3 of those guys. But man, at scrimmage, they are just not equipped, and they've been fumbling, turning the ball over. And they're not good enough to withstand that, and it's ugly. It's ugly right now.
Yeah, their left tackle, I will say, is a good player, but there's only so much one really good offensive lineman can do, right? You can only do if it was a 5-star quarterback that was a future first-round pick, it would be different. But Dave, it's just it's tough, and I just wonder how much longer Pat wants to do this. He's been doing it for a long time, and he's done it, probably the last couple of years at a pretty fairly consistent level. But it just looks like it's hard to see the light at the end of the tunnel.
You're talking about Peter Skoronski, right?
I am. What a great last name.
Was he related to Bob? He's got to be related to Bob Skoronski, isn't he? A grandson or something?
I don't know. Skoronski's a pretty popular name in Illinois. I think it's like Smith everywhere else.
You got a point. There's lots of there's lots of processed meat factories and stuff where Skoronski's work. Pat has. I don't know how he did it all this time. Really, I mean, this is his 17th season there. Yeah. You remember when we used to go to Chicago and he was this peppery young guy, and
he's not as peppy anymore.
Well,
man.
Actually, he was on Monday. You got to look at his press conference. I mean, there are people asking whether he was delusional on drugs because he came in very upbeat, and we're right there. We're right on the. We're so close, and
Oh,
they're not close, man. They're not close.
they just it was such a huge win against Nebraska. One of the best teams in the country to beat them the way they did. I just think they expended too much energy.
Well, I guess you can take happiness in providing happiness to Nebraska fans, doing their part to put an end to that regime. And I know the Cornhusker fans are basking in the glow of Scott Frost's dismissal this bye week. So Northwestern did its part to get that done. But yeah, there's no excuse for Penn State not to just scramble this team on Saturday, no matter what the weather is, which I guess is going to be kind of ugly.
Scramble their eggs. Yeah, I mean, I'm with you. It looks like Northwestern can do a couple things well, but to lose 3 games in a row like that at home, it's they used to be Northwestern used to be really, really tough in close games. You know what I mean? They could play with just about anyone, keep it close in the fourth quarter, and win their share. But to lose 3 in a row to these outfits is a sign of maybe like what you said. You can only do so much with duct tape and 2 stars and 3 stars anymore.
They won that division 2 of the last 4 years. That's the amazing part. They won it in 18 and 20, but they were last the other 2 years, and they look like they're going to be last again this year if Nebraska's got such an easy schedule. They've got a very, very simple schedule. They do. I mean, they could easily. And the problem is that Northwestern it kind of drew it. They got a tough draw. I mean, they got at Maryland, Ohio State, and Penn State out of the East. It's not as easy. They might not win a game the rest of the year. They might not.
Ooh, that's Pat's a good guy. Hell of a linebacker at Northwestern. I know you covered Penn State when Northwestern played. You wrote a lot about the Rose Bowl that they almost beat USC in but couldn't. But that was a magical year. But yeah, he's a big part. One of the most famous Northwestern alums. Wouldn't you say? If not, he's got to be on the very short list.
That was such a titanic accomplishment. I mean, if you had to name, and you're as much of a college football fan as I am, if you had to name the most amazing accomplishments in the history of college, the modern history of college football, what would you say? Snyder at Kansas State, maybe turning that thing around. They were pathetic in the 80s, and Bill Snyder turned that around with a lot of JUCOs, but he did it and turned them into a really competitive team. That I believe they beat Nebraska one year, didn't they? In a very pivotal situation. It was
Nebraska had their number, and then once they had Michael Bishop at quarterback,
Michael Bishop,
they were formidable not only against Nebraska. They were really, really good. They blew it, I think, in one of the. They had a chance, I think, to do something even greater, and I think they lost the Big 12 title game in a game they were favored
97.
to
win. I think it was 97. 97, they ended up in the Alamo
98 or 99.
They ended up in the Alamo Bowl playing Purdue with Billy Dicken as the quarterback. Drew Brees was on the bench, and they were like number 4 in the country when they played Purdue that year. But anyway, you'd say Snyder with Kansas State. I would say Greg Schiano with Rutgers the first time around. I mean, that was the worst team in college football. The worst team in college football when Terry Shea was there. I mean, when he took that thing over in 2001, they were at the bottom of the entire heap. And within 5 years, they were top 10 in the country. They were they were number 6 in the nation in mid-November going to Cincinnati. And I think they got beat by Brian Kelly when he was the coach at Cincinnati in there. And that derailed a season where, they could have conceivably actually played in the BCS National Championship game. So that would be 2. But the third has to be Gary Barnett at Northwestern, which had been just a punching bag. And I don't mean for years, I mean for decades. The Harrisburg favorite son, Denny Green, went in there and it was just a toxic waste dump. And he got them to 3-7-1 in, I think, I forget, in the 80s, 3-7-1, and was voted Big Ten Coach of the Year for that. That's how bad it was. So Barnett came in there from Colorado with a very good staff. Ron Vanderlinden was the defensive coordinator, and that was a miracle worker. I mean, that was a miracle work, and they all of a sudden in '94, remember they came in and played that Penn State team that was undefeated, and they didn't. They got routed like everyone got routed by that Penn State team. But I remember they had 30 first downs in Beaver Stadium. I'm thinking this is a well coached team. You know, they are functional, and then the next year, lo and behold, Penn State goes in there and they've lost a game, and Northwestern has upset Notre Dame. They've upset Michigan. They didn't have to play Ohio State, and that was the game. It was a bitter, cold day. Dyke Stadium, as it used to be called back then, had never been filled. It had never been filled. I mean, in my memory, and it was like the middle of November, it's ABC, Brent Musburger's doing the game. And it had been so long since anyone had been in the seats where the scoreboard was that they didn't plan on it, and people were standing and obstructing the scoreboard numbers because no one ever sat in those seats. And right. Pat Fitzgerald was the middle linebacker. They won the game 21-10, and that was the key component in them getting to the Rose Bowl. They actually did what Gary Barnett said he was going to do, for which he was laughed at. He said he was going to take the purple to Pasadena, and they did. And there they went and lost to Keyshawn Johnson in a wonderful, wonderful Rose Bowl. Probably until the USC Texas Rose Bowl in 2005. I think the most entertaining Rose Bowl that's ever been. But they lost. But it was an incredible accomplishment. Pat is from that accomplishment. He didn't get to play in that Rose Bowl game because he ripped up his knee the last game of the season. But he has, when you talk about replacing him, well, what's your next idea? This guy is the Scott Frost that worked, that went back to his alma mater and got it going, and has been very respectable, thought of as maybe the best coach with little to work with, especially in the league, for years and years and years. It's easy to be Ryan Day or Jim Harbaugh or James Franklin, for that matter. A lot tougher to be Pat Fitzgerald. So, we all like him. We all wish him well, but man, he's in a bad way.
Yeah. And I mean, I just wonder if maybe he's a little bit, you said 17 years. I just wonder at some point there is such a thing as getting a little bit burned out. And I didn't know if maybe he was at that point, but you said he was all fired up on Monday. So who knows? They've had some pretty bad starts to seasons before, but I can't remember one non-conference wise quite like this, where they just, maybe Duke is pretty good, or maybe they're not that bad, but the other two teams, I don't know, man. I just thought that was bad.
Well, they lost all of their non-conference games in 2018 and then won the Big Ten West. So it's not it's not unprecedented. They lost to Duke and Akron and Notre Dame that year. So it's possible, I suppose.
Yeah, it is possible. And after if they upset Penn State, we're going to be kicking ourselves, Dave. They're 25.5-point underdogs. And I'm just trying to, you look at what each side has. I wanted to ask you a little bit about what do you think about Penn State's running game and the fact that it's just been a weird year, right? After the Auburn game, I would have said, man, Nick Singleton just looks like he is ready to be one of the faces of college football this year, even as a true freshman. We've seen very little from Kevon Lee, and now Kaytron Allen, who is now 20 pounds lighter, was clearly their best back against Central Michigan and really bailed them out a little bit. So it's nice to have all those options, but you just wonder, is there ever going to be one guy that emerges in October and November, or is it just going to be, hey, we're going to play the hot hand. They're all talented. We're just going to wait to see which one steps up on game day.
Now, we had kind of a little debate in the press box. We'll give you a little inside baseball, fans, that I just didn't think Singleton looked right. I thought he was bouncing runs too much rather than hitting the holes. And I thought Kaytron Allen just looked better. You thought at the time that Singleton just wasn't getting blocking. He wasn't getting blocking, but that's part of Allen's gift, is that he
Right.
is willing to duck into crevices and power through them. And I don't know
Yeah.
that Singleton is. Is that the way you saw it in retrospect? I'm sure you went and looked at the
Well,
tape.
you just wonder, Dave, you kind of wonder if you just look at Singleton and Kaytron Allen. Like Kaytron Allen played at IMG. I think they probably played against some decent competition. When Singleton was at Governor Mifflin, I don't know. I don't know how many times he had to actually stick his nose in there and really kind of like a hunting dog rooting out for truffles or something like that, looking for a hole and kind of finding it. I just think that he was just faster than just
I
about
don't,
everyone.
I don't believe I've ever heard that metaphor.
Yeah, yeah, you can use it. You can use it. Sniffing around, burrowing. But anyway, I think that maybe that's something he's going to need to learn. But if the Lions get him in space, you saw Auburn's team speed didn't really matter. He's a special guy, but I think the whole key with him is they got to get him past the line of scrimmage. Whereas Kaytron, he doesn't, like you said, he doesn't have a tackle. He doesn't have a carry for loss this year. He can get 2 or 3 yards for sure, and then sometimes he had a couple of 30-yard runs against Central Michigan. One was called back, so I don't really know what to make of this running back room, because I like Kevon Lee a lot coming into the year as well, and he barely plays, so I don't know what's going on.
Well, Lee clearly doesn't have the burst of the other
Yeah.
two guys, so there's that. And you would have to assume. I don't think has anyone asked Franklin whether that's essentially he wouldn't answer you anyway. So I think that is the answer to his lack of playing time. Assuming there's nothing wrong with it. I don't think there's anything wrong with him. But the pattern so far, I think, might be reversed from what it should be. Usually you have a power back. Hassan Haskins, for instance, last year would start the game and soften up the defense, and then Blake Corum would come in, the little race car, the speed racer, and hit the edge, and the defense is a little tired in the second quarter, and zoom. So up to this point, Singleton has started with Allen being the change-up back. Maybe we reverse him. What do you think of that?
It makes sense to me. I also think that Kaytron is the guy. I think inside the 10-yard line, he's the guy when the defense is condensed. I think he's most equipped right now to be the guy that if it's 3rd and goal from the 2-yard line and you line up under center, I think he's probably the guy I would want behind Clifford and not Nick Singleton. There's nothing wrong with Nick Singleton's talents, but I think he's still learning maybe how to be an inside and outside runner, whereas Kaytron, I think, is their best inside runner right now.
There's been a lot of backs who turned out to be great inside runners. When they first came into college football, I remember LaShawn McCoy, his first year at Pittsburgh, and not really liking to run inside like that. He had to learn it. And I actually mentioned that to him in an interview one time at the Eagles facility, and he got a little bit pissed off. He said, I said, I saw it, man. I mean, you didn't initially like to. The point I was trying to make is you have to learn how to run inside in both step ups, both in the college and the NFL, because it's a steep step up in both cases. It can happen, and Singleton's certainly big enough. He's 220. He's big enough to take the punishment. It's not an easy job. Pardon me?
As a Cowboys fan, Tony Dorsett had to learn that when he got to Dallas. That's another example of a guy.
Yeah, that's a really good call. Yeah,
and I thought that watching the Cowboys and Giants on Monday, I thought Barkley has gotten a lot better since he left Penn State at not trying to bounce everything. He's been a little bit more patient, and he had a nice touchdown run against the Cowboys that he cut back, but it started inside, and he kind of waited, and when he saw the hole, he was gone. But yeah, I think you're right. I think there's a feel for that, and I think that you also have to be ready to when you run inside, you got to be prepared to get hit. I mean, and that I think also takes some getting used to.
Yeah, it's easy for us to say. I mean, who wants to get hit like that in there? It's
no one,
especially by no. You have to kind of enjoy the contact. You kind of have to be a freak. If we could, I am curious now. And also in retrospect, we still have not seen Drew Allar in important minutes in a game in doubt, other than at Purdue when he was forced to come in with Sean Clifford had cramps in his legs. Do you think we see it here against Northwestern?
I would imagine that they are going to go into the game with a plan to play Drew Allar in the second quarter. But if by some chance it is 7-7 or 10-7, I don't know that they're going to stick to that plan. I just think that I do think they desperately want to play him as much as they can. But I think James is aware that he wants to feel a little bit more secure about where they are. I'm with you, Dave. I would like to see him play regardless, because I don't think there's much of a downside. I mean, what's the worst case scenario if you say we're going to put him in 5 minutes into the second quarter? Like, what are they? They're not going to be down 21-3. I mean, it's just going to be. Could they start slow? Yeah, but I think I know what you're saying. It's one thing to put him in the third quarter up 3 touchdowns. It's another thing to give him a little bit more meaningful snaps when the other guys are pretty fresh and they're not dejected. And he looked good when he did it against Purdue. So maybe we will see that. I don't know that James is going to do that unless they're up double digits.
Yeah, there was what I was trying to say to him during the press conference. And very honestly, I was running the question by before we got him in the post game after the Central Michigan game. It's like, How do I phrase this where he'll answer it? And everyone I asked said he ain't going to answer it, which he didn't. But I'm trying to be empathetic of his situation. He does not want to blow a game or blow the confidence of his young prodigy, because his offensive line is a little bit sketchy and he's not really mobile. He doesn't want him in there making a critical mistake in important minutes. On the other hand, man, I think these days it's the only way to learn, especially with a kid this good. You got to put him in maybe in a 10-7 game in the second quarter. And that's the only, especially against Northwestern. It's not like you're facing last year's Michigan front. You're not. Right. This is the time to do it. They got a bye next week. You got to get everyone ready right now, because it's going to be a tough stretch here coming up at Michigan, Minnesota, which you saw Minnesota, right, at Michigan State.
I mean, it is correct. It is Michigan, Minnesota, Ohio State.
Ohio State. I was having a couple of beers here locally with a guy named Raj Verma, who is a very well-connected Michigan State guy. He lives in Atlanta. And, it's a situation where Mel Tucker has kind of put that he's put his own personality on that program of toughness, and Minnesota just went in there and out-toughed them. It was 31-0, 34-7. Is that what it was? Ass kicking. It was 34-0 at one point, and it was just a front to back ass kicking at scrimmage. And both with Mo Ibrahim and Tanner Morgan looked terrific. Those two guys did not have good years last year. Ibrahim was out the first game with it's an Achilles injury. You don't know if you're going to come back from that.
Right.
He looks terrific. They've got a backup back that runs behind him, a changeup guy. And the other thing was Tanner Morgan just did not have his mojo going. And to your credit, you said that Kirk Shiraka would revitalize him, and it really looks – he's the perfect RPO quarterback. I mean, he makes quick decisions. He knows that offense. He likes that offense. They seem to have good enough receivers who catch the ball. They lost their top wideout to injury, but they looked really good. I was impressed, like a very even division between pass and run. But we're getting ahead of ourselves. But I was amazed with how good Minnesota looked.
Yeah, that'll be in a couple weeks. That's going to be a really fun one to talk about all week with Shiraka, with PJ, with Tanner Morgan, with Mo, the running back, and the fact that they are physically they are ready. They are ready for a street fight in any game they want to play, and they're not going to back down. That they're a physical team, and it'll be fun to talk about that because it looks like with the schedule they have, they should be unbeaten coming into to Beaver
Yeah,
Stadium.
they
So
should
there'll
be
be a
7-0.
lot of buzz.
Yeah, they should be 7-0. And the point I was getting it to is that's the game after they go to Michigan, which is going to be a
Yes,
physical team.
and
It
in front of
sure,
Ohio State. In
yeah,
front of Ohio State.
so they're going to get softened up by these two badass bully ball teams, and then they got to play the fighter jets. It's a really I can't remember a tougher stretch of 3 games on a Penn State schedule.
Yeah, yeah. Anything else you picked up about Northwestern this week? I'm really excited to see this left tackle play from Northwestern. The reason I say that is, well, I am because Penn State's defensive ends are off to a very good start, and it's not necessarily Adisa Isaac. It's Chop Robinson's off to a really really good start, and also that freshman Dennis Sutton. He's a guy that's really going to help them at some point. He's got 3 sacks already, but 2 were in garbage time last week. I just think that's going to be a little bit of an education there, and I think that Penn State's ends are going to be up for the challenge. But I read some things about Northwestern and from talent evaluators, and they had tapes of Aiden Hutchinson in the Northwestern game last year, and he did some damage, but whenever they lined him up against Skoronski, it was no go, man. He did not do anything with this guy, and this is a really good player, and I think it's going to be a nice test for Penn State's edge guys, and I think they need it.
Well, I think what we've seen of Manny Diaz, he's kind of like a mistake hitter. A lot of great home run hitters in Major League Baseball, they get almost all of their big stats off of mediocre and not good pitchers. It's when they go up against the aces, it's a lot tougher for them. Usually the pitcher wins. And Manny, I think, has very much taken advantage of you saw the Richardson kid from Central Michigan. He was picking them apart a little bit, whereas Finley from Auburn, you could tell Manny had no respect for either one of those guys, either one of those quarterbacks. Helinski is kind of in between the Northwestern quarterback. He was a stud recruit at South Carolina, started 11 games for them there. Basically was kind of a washout on a bad team. He's had a really tough go of it with his brother was the Washington State quarterback who committed suicide, and it's been just a really heart-wrenching, tragic kind of stretch right there, and you could understand how anyone would be thrown for a loop. He came to Northwestern. He wasn't good at first. I've seen stretches of him, especially in the Nebraska game, in this last game against Miami of Ohio, who, by the way, was playing their backup quarterback. Their starter is Blaine Gabbert's little brother, and he's good, Brett Gabbert, but he got injured. So Miami beat them with their backup quarterback, man, who completed like 8 passes the whole game. And that ain't good. So Miami ran, to your point, Miami ran the ball when they needed to run the ball. They busted a 66-yard run at the end of the game for the winning touchdown. It set up the winning touchdown where a Northwestern kid on the edge just whiffed. You were talking about a MAC tailback, okay? Just whiffed. That's what they have defensively. They're not good defensively. You saw them against Nebraska, I think.
You keep bringing that up, but it's fair. It's fair, Dave. It's all fair. They were the better. They were the much better team against Nebraska. The final 20 minutes of that game, whenever Nebraska went up at 11 and they tried that onside kick, that Northwestern was clearly the better team, and that's very disheartening to me. But your point, they looked like a team that might be able to upset a couple people in the Big Ten West off of that game, but the reality is that Nebraska just stunk that much, and now It's just been a real struggle for Northwestern to find its footing.
What I'm telling you is they have tools offensively. They've got Evan Hall is a very good little back. He could play for Penn State. Cam Porter is a good changeup back. They've got running backs, and I think Helinski has skills. He can fling the ball.
Yeah.
They've got the left tackle, Skoronsky, you're talking about. They will try to run the ball. But, man, they can't stop anybody. And Penn State should just meat grind these guys and play their whole offense, but it could rain up there. Yeah. You've got to be able to run on these guys. If Miami of Ohio can run on them when it matters, you should be able to run on them. And to me, this is a prove-it game for Penn State's running attack.
All right, just to be clear, Dave, how many carries a game is Hull getting in the Penn State running back rotation with those two freshmen?
He's a change-up back.
He gets. Okay. I was just curious,
but he's a little bumper car. I mean, he's quicker.
I know he leads a team in receptions. I know that he's a very, very he's invaluable, right?
He plays. He's a good little back. He's tough. He's kind of bullet bodied, fire hydrant body, but quicker than you think. So he's not to be discounted. What I'm saying is, offensively, they have tools. Defensively, boy, yeah, I mean, even Nebraska was like running up and down the field on them. They just shot themselves in the foot the whole time. So there's no excuse not to really move the ball on these guys.
All right, Davey, you know what time it is. It's 31. We're 31 minutes in here on the Blue White Breakdown. Give me your pick, maybe one key you're going to be watching for, and then I will do the same.
I will say Penn State 38-14, and it's kind of problematic whether Hurricane Ian remnants are going to be an effect here or not. But that would, of course, affect both teams' game plan. I think it's going to be kind of raw and cloudy and maybe rainy up there. But I want to see Penn State run the ball and run it effectively against these guys. If they can't do that against these guys, it's a red flag. It's a red flag against Michigan.
Dave, I need a bonus prediction from you. Will we see Drew Allar midway through the second quarter or not?
No.
Okay. All right.
I got to go with what James. I got to go with what James Franklin's pattern has been, which is, if they get ahead by 2 or 3 touchdowns, yes. But if they don't, no. And that's the key point to me. They should play them whether they're ahead or not.
Yeah. I actually picked 38-7. So we see Penn State around the same point total. We'll see how Northwestern does up there. But I think it's one of those games that you just I wanted to say, boy, if Penn State doesn't really grab this game by the throat, Northwestern could hang around. But then the more I looked at what Northwestern had done the last 3 weeks and who had done it to them, they don't have the depth and the athletes really, I think, to really, really. If Penn State somehow turns it over 3 or 4 times, the penalties and stuff like that, but I just don't know. Even if all that happens, I don't know if they can stay within 3 touchdowns of Penn State. So I think 38-7. You have Northwestern covering though, so that's interesting to me.
Oh, it's probably a backdoor cover is what I'm thinking. I mean, this should not be a game.
Okay. All right, Penn State fans, that's it. We talked about Fitzgerald. We talked about Gary Barnett. We talked about the 95 Northwestern team. We brought up Nebraska's season opening loss to Northwestern, so that was super. But we also talked about Drew Allar and the gauntlet that Penn State's got to run once they get past this game in the bye week. It's going to get real interesting, I think. And Dave, I know you agree for Penn State.
This is kind of like the industrial film where they review when you're in school, review what we've seen. And give you a chance to write down the outline, okay.
It's in summation. I always like to give a little summation. I'm going to see if you can talk about Nebraska losing in every podcast. Like so far, you're like 6 for your last 6. So I like.
Well, I got to get this in. I did talk about the new coach before we leave. Do you have a thought on other than Bill O'Brien on the new coach? Because I put in a new name. Did you see the new name I put in?
I
that they should
didn't. I
consider?
mean, I know you're a big Leopold guy. I know Campbell's been another guy that's been floating around. I just don't know about Billy O in Lincoln, Nebraska. So, who is the new
What
name? I didn't see it.
what about Charles Huff? A,
Okay.
a jolt of personality. I mean, I
Right.
guarantee you, if he gets an interview, he'll knock it out of the park. And they've never had anybody with personality at that place. I mean, back to Osborne, Pelini had a personality, but not one you'd want to be around.
How dare you say Bill Callahan didn't have a personality, Dave?
I just think, and they've never had a black coach either, except for the guy they have now as an interim coach. I
Mickey
think they
Joseph.
could really use a dose of Charles Huff, who could be, he's a buoyant, fun guy, interesting guy, and clearly a hell of a coach. I mean, if you've done what he's done already at Marshall,
Right.
I just think that would be
Yeah.
an interesting interview.
All right. We'll see. Anyway, on that note, on that Nebraska note, we will conclude this Penn State podcast. Dave, I will see you up there on Saturday. Drive safe. I'll try and do the same. And then it's on to the bye week.